Welcome to the Source of Commercial Real Estate, where we talk to the experts in commercial real estate so you can grow your business, find a competitive advantage, and use real estate to live the life that you want. I am your host, Jonathan Hayek, and today I am talking with Thomas Walley. Thomas is the founder of Unacast, and he is obsessed with developing a data-driven solutions designed to improve the way retailers and real estate investors make data-driven business decisions. He started Unicast with his co-founder, KJ, to help businesses gain an in-depth understanding of how people move around the planet. Since its inception, Unacast has raised more than $50 million from venture capital. He's received multiple awards, and he is helping retailers and real estate investors optimize their strategies and retail operations. Before Unacast, Thomas was part of the early team that developed TIDAL, which was later sold to Jay-Z. I'm sure there's some interesting stories there. And he's a regular contributor to Forbes, Inc. magazine, Business Insider, the New York Times, and the Wall Street Journal. Thomas, I am thrilled to have you here. How are you doing today?
On this Tuesday, Jonathan, I'm doing pretty good. Pretty good, thank you.
It's great to have you. Thank you so much for being here. Why don't we start off with a little bit about your background? I just read a little bit about your bio, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about your background.
Yeah, so as you can hear, I have a bit of accent. So I'm originally from Norway, but then I've been living in the US for the last 8 years to build out Unicast, which has been an amazing, thrilling, challenging journey, to say the least. I think we learned so much just about how to build a company, but also to better understand how we can make real estate developers and retailers become more data driven. Like that's really what our passion lies about, right? Like how are these real estate developers and how are these retailers making investments in hundreds of millions, even billions, right? But rely less on gut feel and more on data driven insights, both to look at what's happening in the past, but also kind of try to have a crystal ball of how the future will look like.
Perfect. So will you describe Unicast for us? What is it? What does it provide? Who should be interested in it?
Yeah, so the whole kind of concept about Unicast, as I said, is to help real estate investors and retailers make better data-driven decisions. And one of the key components that we see when those people in those companies are making investment decisions is to understand how do people move around on the planet. Like what kind of cities do they live in? Where do they travel? What kind of stores do they go to? We saw like the big migration post-COVID, people flooding New York, moving to Florida. Are they going to stay or will they move back? So that whole people movement and analytics around that, that's what Unicast is all about. And we source that type of insights from like multiple different data sources, from mobile location data, demographic data, weather data. All that gives us a very good understanding of how many people went to this particular building, at what time, what day, where they come from. And that has been really kind of remarkable insights for the real estate industry to take on.
Before we go deeper into Unicast, I would love to learn more about what inspires you and what inspired Unicast. You founded it along with your business partner. You exited TIDAL. You were a part of that. And I imagine you were looking for what's next. So can you talk to me about the beginning stages of Unicast and what was your inspiration for it?
Yeah, no, it's you're actually pretty accurate in that little intro. So yeah, KJ and myself, we know each other since college. So we kind of worked together for now almost 20 years. It's pretty amazing. But after building Unicast, after building TIDAL alongside Spotify, JC and Beyonce took that over. You're right. We want to do something. Then we very much just kind of looked opportunistically about different industry, different verticals, like different challenges. And one of the challenges that we found, this was back in 2014, was that there's a huge understanding of what people do online, what we click on, what we buy, what we read, what we listen to. But there's a lack of understanding what people are doing. Like, how do they move about in the real world? And majority of our time spent is in the real world, even though we sit a lot in front of our computers. And that real world understanding, no one had captured that. Like no one had kind of gone in and looked at how can we provide the insights. So that was kind of really the start of Unicast. Very much, hey, we want to figure out how to understand how people move around. And since then, we kind of embarked on figuring out through a lot of trying and failing what kind of verticals, what kind of products, what's the use cases where this is highly valuable. And over kind of multiple years, the real estate industry is like one of the many verticals where we see a great challenge that needs to be solved, where location data insights truly helps to fill that.
Will you describe, I guess, the problem that you're solving? So 2014, a software like this didn't exist. And so retailers and real estate agents were going more off of gut feeling, or maybe they were counting cars instead of using actual data. So will you kind of go through what problem are you solving for investors and retailers?
Yeah, and you're right there, Jonathan, that this data didn't exist in 2014. There was a lot of like anecdotal data and anecdotal stories. But a typical kind of use case that we have is we like to kind of think about both the real estate investors as well as the retailers. And it's kind of very well interconnected depending on what kind of tenants you have, etc. But on the real estate side, when we have real estate investors looking to make investment decisions, they want to find the most optimal building or the most optimal store where they can kind of have the highest yield. And this is where the location data really fits in, because we can help them to understand, is it neighborhood A or neighborhood B that is seeing the highest foot traffic? Okay, so you would think we should definitely go for neighborhood A, highest foot traffic. However, now you also layer in demographic data. Like what kind of people are there? Is it mostly workers? Is it mostly residents? What's the age? What's the demographic profile, income, etc.? So now you have more insights into those two locations. You can also look at kind of surrounding retailers and brands and see, hey, are they being successful? Are they pulling in enough foot traffic to their store? Is it declining or increasing? We're kind of trying to address one of the things I'm shocked about when I speak to a lot of real estate investors, that when they go and buy a property, they send out a team, 3-4 people, and they drive around in the neighborhood for a couple of days, look at the cafes, like kind of get the feel. Like that is, you can never take the human part away of investment, I think. But if you can back that up with proven data, and you can kind of look at historical data as well, I think you are more likely to make better investments that you can recommend to your executive team.
So let's go into maybe a use case. Let's imagine I'm a real estate investor and I'm looking at some retail property. Let's say it's a it's a strip mall. Yeah. And I want to know how busy is the strip mall. I could go on location, I could sit in the parking lot and I could count cars, I could count people, but maybe it's an off day, maybe it's a good day. So me as a real estate investor, if I say, yes, I want more data, I'm going to be buying a lot of these retail properties, and I want to know what Unicast has to offer. So if I talk to Unicast, what would I get as a real estate investor? What do you provide me as an investor?
Yeah, so there's two things that we will provide you. We will provide you with a dashboard, a beautiful dashboard. You can log in and you can search for typical locations that you're interested in. For instance, the strip mall that you mentioned, you can look at certain neighborhoods, you can look at zip codes, and you can understand the foot traffic data and the foot traffic analytics to those particular locations. And we also layer on demographic data, right? So you understand what is the age, what is the segment, and so on. If you're a more sophisticated real estate developer, meaning you have an analyst, you maybe have a data scientist, you have a team, you can also get the data that you're looking at in the dashboard, you can get it as a data feed. So now you can incorporate that data into your own dashboard or into your own analysis, and you might even overlay our data with other internal data sets you have to build out a more robust and better analysis. So it's truly kind of that dashboard and the data that you will get to answer all these questions you have about how are certain properties performing now and how do we expect them to perform in the future.
That's great. That's what I was hoping you were going to say, because listeners, admittedly, I've never logged into Unicast. I have not seen this dashboard, but I was hoping that you were going to say that there was going to be a dashboard where I could, and tell me if I'm wrong, but I'm hoping that I'd be able to log in. I could input an address or location or intersection, and it's going to populate all kinds of data information for me. Would I be correct about that?
You're absolutely correct about that. You can search between millions of point of interest, millions of stores that we have in the platform. You can also like draw your own locations as well, because maybe you want to look at like a certain neighborhood, or you want to kind of look at the strip mall plus a bit more on the outside. So it's a highly kind of customizable solution as well. And yeah, you get everything from the foot traffic data by week, on a monthly basis. You get visitors, where they come from. Like this is a really interesting piece for the retailers, because if you think about retailers today, they have very good view of what their customers are doing online. Every click, what they buy. We know how we're being haunted, right? When we leave the shopping cart and we didn't check out, they will come after us. But that kind of goes from the retail stores as well. They know how many people are in the stores. There's a lot of kind of cameras now and sensors tracking what shelves you are. But the second you leave the store, they're in the dark. Like, what other competitors are you going to? Where do you live? Where do you work? What's your route? Like, how do you get to that store? Am I your first stop on the way? Am I the last one? So kind of helping retailers and also real estate developers who owns their own is to understand like what happens when these customers leave the stores, and how do I optimize my marketing strategies? Are there room for additional stores that won't cannibalize my existing ones? That's a lot of the kind of questions that our customers come to us with.
So does Unicast provide that information to retailers? Do retailers get that information of, hey, when they leave your store, they typically go this direction, or when they're coming to your store, this is the route that they drive?
So it's more on the aggregated level. We typically look at trade areas, right? So if you have a certain store, we can help answer of the people that visit this store, what zip code do they live in? Neighborhood do they come from? Those are the kind of the granularities that most of the clients want to have. I think there's a good kind of context or kind of opportunity to like do more about routing, like what road do they took, but it hasn't really been like a question that's been asked too many times.
Sure. So when I think about the data that you're providing, a lot of real estate investors might be familiar with maybe a competitor to yours, Placer AI. Are you familiar with Placer?
Very familiar with those guys, yes.
Okay. So can you differentiate yourselves from Placer? How does Unicast have a competitive advantage? How do you set yourselves apart from Placer?
Yeah. So first of all, like all props to the Placer team. I think they've done an amazing job building a beautiful product and really kind of educating the market about the power of location data. The way that we stand out a bit different to them is Unicast has been a data company first. I mentioned customers get the dashboard or the data. So a lot of our clients access the data. Like they do that through an API. They do that through different data feeds. We kind of like really sell a lot to that sophisticated buyer. So understand kind of how the data should be structured so it's easily to ingest into other systems. Make sure that the data is accurate, that it represents ground truth, etc. That's where we differentiate a lot from other companies in the space. On the dashboard side, we believe that simplicity is everything. When a dashboard becomes too cumbersome or too kind of crowded, it's sometimes hard to use. The dashboard can't solve everything, but it can solve a few very pointed on solutions. And we try to be as specific and clear and easy dashboard. So there's like fewer buttons to click on, and you're like really into what you need to answer.
Will you talk about your data sources? I assume a big source is going to be cell phone data. I think in a previous answer, I heard you say weather, but I may have caught that incorrectly. Will you talk about your sources of data? How are you finding out where people are moving around?
Yeah, so there's multiple sources, right, that goes into understanding foot traffic to a particular store or a particular area. And the core component here is GPS data that we collect from cell phones, and we have kind of multiple partnerships doing that with opt-in consent and all of that. But what we kind of provide out to real estate developers is aggregated data, right? So it's the number, the count, how many people went to a certain store, how many people went there yesterday, how many people went there last month. Of those 100 people, how many come from this particular neighborhood, etc. In order to do so and to calculate these numbers as good as possible, we do a lot with machine learning to optimize those models. And this is where, to your point, the weather data comes in, because you can also look at, like, foot traffic and weather has a very high correlation. When it's raining, there's few people out there. When it's sunny, it's more depending. So when we look at our machine learning models to predict the number of people that are at a certain location, there is close to 50 sources of data going in there. That all is kind of a part of coming out with the foot traffic number and the relevant demographic data. So that's a lot of the secret sauce here, and what we've now been spending 9 years developing.
As a real estate investor, a big part of what I would be looking at if I'm considering a property is data over time. So are traffic counts increasing? Are they decreasing? What are traffic counts at certain times of day? Like if I'm going to be buying a Starbucks, I want to know what morning traffic counts are like. If I'm buying a retailer with 10 years left on the lease, I want to have a pretty good idea that traffic counts are going to be increasing over the next 10 years. And they've been increasing over the last several years. Are those kinds of the kinds of data points that Unicast can provide?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think you take the time dimension there is important to look at kind of time, look at historical, look at seasonality, right? That's why you have to pick a location at a vendor with multiple years of history, because you need to kind of compare year over year to truly understand if it's going better or worse. But there's also the point here around granularity, because we see a lot of real estate developers focusing on the traffic count to the store. Okay, great. You can look at the traffic count, but now you have the traffic count to the store. What about the change in demographics? And one interesting observation that we saw during COVID was, and I think this kind of just shows the power of the data and what it can actually tell. During COVID, we all read in the news that everybody in Tribeca fled New York, right? It was families, a couple of kids, like that's the family area in New York City, and they might rented something out of the city, or they had a summer house in Hamptons or Florida or whatever. So the public kind of perception was that Tribeca is empty. But what we saw in the data was that no, that wasn't the case. Now people moved into Tribeca, but the people moving into Tribeca had a very different demographic profile than the people leaving. So the families left with high income, and in moved younger individuals with lower income, right? So looking at the count, but now you're looking at the change in the demographics. And then we can kind of zoom out even a bit more, and now we look at the neighborhood. Okay, so you're looking at one particular building in a neighborhood, but how's that neighborhood performing? And this is especially interesting in the change we've been seeing in the office space now, like how many people are going into the office, offices being repurposed to other stuff. So is that store you're looking at, a property looking at, in a healthy neighborhood? Is the neighborhood traffic going up or down? And even if it's going up or down, like what is the composition between workers, residents, and tourists? And then you can kind of take the next layer and look at migration patterns, right? So now you look, okay, are people moving in and out of that area? And of the people that are moving in and out, again, back to the demo data, does the income, for instance, or the age change? We usually see that the net population in other areas are the same, but we see like huge differences, that more people have moved out of the city into the suburbs where I live, and that's a younger population with more money. So the crux there for the real investors is you can't just look at one data point. You need to be able to kind of look at multiple data points to then provide a good understanding of what's happening in that geographic area that you're looking to invest in.
Yeah, as you were talking and describing some of the smaller, finer points that Unicast can provide, it's incredibly powerful if you can have that demographic data, knowing income, knowing if they're locals or tourists. It could provide an incredible amount of intelligence if you're going to open a store here or invest in a strip mall there. The example for office buildings you provided, really, really powerful stuff. But in all of this data that you are compiling, is there a way, or how do you confirm that the data is accurate? So can you talk a little bit about how you and Unicast think about data quality and efficacy, that you're measuring what you think you're measuring and that the numbers you're coming out with are accurate?
And this is the tricky part with location data, because what location data in its essence is, it is certain amount, I think it's like 12 or 14 satellites orbiting the globe at 12,000 miles per hour. And then we have a tiny GPS chip on our cell phones. And we all kind of experience how that blue dot sometimes is jumping around when we open up Google Maps or Apple Maps. So inherently, and with full transparency, the data is inaccurate. The data is like very hard to work with. And this is where the data models and the machine learning comes in. The data will never be 100% accurate. It won't. It's just technically impossible. But it's all about making it directionally accurate, so you can see the changes in trends over time, over a week, over a month, over a year. And we do a lot of quality checks, right, where we take our data towards ground truth. Because there are ways to get a very accurate count to a certain location. You can't get it at scale. That's why we need to provide our data at scale. But we can kind of make checks, and we do that regularly, where we kind of look at what is the confidence level we have with the ground truth data. And that is kind of usually where our clients trust us, right? Like that's what they like about Unicast, that the confidence level and the correlation to ground truth is tremendously high.
Yeah, can you put any numbers on that? I think about like a confidence interval, or we're 95% accurate, 95% confident that it's within this percentage. How do you quantify your confidence level?
So we see like plus 90% is where we come out, and that's and again, it all goes back to the use case, right? If you absolutely need the exact number of people, like you can't use location data for that. But for the majority of the use cases, to understand trends around an area, trends around a neighborhood or to a store, like that confidence interval is far good enough.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense, and that trend data would be incredibly powerful, because whether a store or an intersection has a traffic count of 12,000 cars or 11,500 cars is probably not crucial to an investment, but whether that intersection is seeing increases over time or decreases over time, that's really the important part. Exactly. Will you, as we finish up our discussion specifically on Unicast, talk to me about something that maybe a listener might not expect. What might a listener be surprised to hear in terms of the capabilities of Unicast?
Yeah, I think there's particularly one thing there that we have invested quite heavily in the last 6 months. And it's no surprise, it's around generative AI, but I'll explain why it makes sense. Because what I think everybody is like seeing now is like generative AI, everybody talks about it, but what is actually the real use case for it? I have tons of services and like apps that I'm using that has some AI stuff, but what's the benefit for me? What we kind of learn at Unicast and we kind of seen over the last year is what generative AI is really good at is to bridge the gap between numbers and narratives. So bridge the gap between numbers and narratives. And what I mean by that is if you are a real estate investor and you license our dashboard or you license our data, now you're looking at a lot of graphs, right? You're looking at a lot of different graphs. You see foot traffic going up, you see demographic data shifting XYZ, you see the neighborhood is kind of moving less from workers over to residents, but that only happened in Q2 and now it changes in Q3. So as a data analyst, you have to interpret all those numbers, right? You have to kind of like stitch all those graphs that you're looking at together and try to come up with, what is my recommendation to the executive leadership team? They're the ones that will make the investment decisions. And this is where generative AI is amazing, because generative AI can very easily, with the right models and when the right team builds it, take those numbers and turn it into narratives. That means that in the Unicast dashboard now, if you take up a specific location, McDonald's, boom, now you'll get all the information that you need around foot fake changes, around demographic, around neighborhood, read out to you. So you don't have to make those connections yourself. And you can even kind of start asking questions into it. Tell me about this location. What should I know? What has happened in the last couple of months? And that just makes it even easier for real estate investors to become more data-driven, which is what we are striving for every single day. One, by providing them the data so they can make more data-driven decisions. But now you don't need that analyst that has to sit hours and hours and kind of try to interpret. This is what generative AI is amazing at, bridging between numbers to narratives.
That makes a lot of sense. And I would anticipate that a lot of people are maybe not comfortable with data. Maybe they understand that it's important and they should be interested in it and it should go into their decision-making process, but they're not comfortable looking at all of these charts and graphs and making sense of it. So I can definitely understand how using generative AI to make sense of all of the data would certainly be helpful.
Yeah.
Thomas, I recently watched a keynote that you gave, and you talked about the sort of the advantage or competitive advantage that Unicast has being part Norwegian and part American. And so I'd love for you to talk about some things that maybe some American business owners might not realize, that you having kind of one foot in the American culture and the Norwegian culture, how is that an advantage to Unicast as a business?
Yeah, I think there is. It's amazing to be able to be like born and raised in Norway, have lived there my larger part of my life, but now live in the US for almost a decade. We have half of the team in Norway, we have half of the team in the US. So we can literally kind of cherry pick, right? Like what are the culture traits that we want to highlight that we believe will make our products better and our clients more successful? And I think there's like maybe a handful, like three, four that I usually come back to. But one of the things that really is advantage when you are a data company like us is transparency. So one of our values has always been like trust through transparency. And to elaborate a bit on that is Norway is a very transparent society. We only 5 million people in Norway, so pretty small country. It's a very stable political climate in comparison to other countries, including the US. And that has kind of created a lot of trust in the society. So to give an example, like the transparency level in Norway is that every year, all the tax information is made publicly available. So every year you can go onto a website owned by the government and you can type in a name, your neighbor, your friend, your colleague, and you'll see what was their income last year, how much did they pay in tax, and what's their wealth. Like that's kind of pretty absurd to have here in the States. But this is just common ground back in Norway. And that trust through transparency, it is important. That kind of how that is institutionalized into us, into how we share great news, we share bad news. I'm always the believer that the more information the team has about more or less everything, the better decisions they can make. But that also translates to our products, because what we eventually sell when we sell data and insights, we sell trust. Our clients are making investment decisions based on what we provide them. So when you asked me the question earlier and said, tell me a bit about the accuracy and what you kind of, you can say like the gut feel answer should be, oh, we are the best, we are accurate, and we can tell you. Like we go very differently about it. We tell you what our data can't do. Hands up, like this, our data can't do that. We don't want to try to oversell you and try to kind of package this into a way. It also goes so far that when you're a client and you license our data, we walk you through our methodology. Very detailed. This is how we build it. And you might see that as IP and why are we giving about kind of the secrets. So it's like we don't look at it that way, because unless our clients can trust how we build it, they're not going to buy it. So that kind of trust through transparency is something that we both institutionalize in the company, but we also take that one step into our product so that our clients are very comfortable when they use the data to make their hundreds of $million investments.
And I will second what you just said about your answer about the accuracy of the data. When you said, hey, if you're looking for 100% accuracy for traffic counts or how many people are in this intersection, it's just not possible. It's not possible with GPS data. And those types of answers are not typical in American culture. Generally, I'm sure that you found in American culture, an American would find a way to sugarcoat something that is maybe less than ideal, or, you might anticipate what me as the questioner would want to hear. And so you'd find a way to craft an answer that, that makes it more pleasing to me. But, you were very transparent with that answer. And so I think that was a great example. Have you ever gotten any pushback or, any people second guessing, whether it's from customers or investors, of people pushing back on some of your tendencies towards transparency?
Any pushback?
Or anyone saying like, whoa, we don't need to answer questions quite so honestly, or we don't need to be quite so straightforward as that.
No.
Or do people mostly appreciate it?
People are usually a bit surprised because that's not what they expect. To your point, like they expect to get the answer by the book. Yeah, it's absolutely accurate because blah, 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 blah. And then they didn't really answer the question. So that's kind of more what we experience is that people, oh, wow, that was a pretty honest answer. And then they can ask, so why did he mention that? And that, again, we see this as a strength, right? Because, we know what we're good at and we know what we are bad at. So, no, I wouldn't say it has been a pushback, but it's sometimes a little bit surprise when we are transparent about what our data can't and can't do. And I'm sure that we have lost many deals because of it, because others have oversold but I feel more comfortable kind of being very upfront and transparent, especially when you buy data.
Thomas, in my intro, I read that you've raised over $50 million from venture capital from Unacast. The real estate investment world is slightly different than the venture capital world, but I'd love to just kind of get some of your feedback and some of your experience in raising a good chunk of money from venture capital. So you, as someone that is not native to America, what's your experience been like raising capital in the US? How's that experience been for you?
I've learned one thing, that when you are raising capital, and it seems like this is like a theme, and we planned this, but this is just all coming together. Raising money is also about trust, right? It's about, hey, do I trust you to give you $1 million that you're going to grow to 3, 5, 10? And where we did wrong, I remember this very much. KJ and I, we started Unicast. We had just an idea, right? We didn't really have much technology or clients or products, but we flew over to US and we were like, yeah, we're gonna raise money from US investors, and they were like, wow, this is a really, wow, I love this kind of idea. Can be a massive market, but who are you? We don't know you. First time I'm meeting you from Norway. Okay, like that sounds just a bit uncomfortable. So we failed big time raising money in the US the first time, because no one knew us, no one trusted us. The round we ended up raising, the first, was from people that we knew in Norway, people that was in our network, former business partners, it was former colleagues, etc. And we kind of, if you look at our funding history, we always raised when we have known those people at least for 18 months. So one of my kind of big recommendations, and I advise a lot of other companies as well on the venture side of startup, but I think this kind of also goes for the real estate. You have to think about fundraising as sales. We have to build that relationship. You have to kind of start. I like to start almost like 2 years in advance and tell them who I am, what we're doing. They can follow us. They can see the progress. They can see the challenges, right? Be upfront about the challenges, but then they see how we solve and tackle the challenges. So fundraising is like a very like time-consuming, long horizon. The activities that you do today, you're going to harvest those in 18 to 24 months. You can't just go out and say, hey, here's a great idea, I need to raise your money. I think it's very few companies that are successful that way.
So, as you're trying to raise capital, you're building trust, you're telling your story, you're talking about your failures and your learnings. Do you have any favored or preferred methods for communicating? I assume one is appearing on podcasts. What are some of your other methods that you use to get your story out there and build trust and relationships?
So we had a dedicated investor newsletter. This was like 7, 8 years ago. I think at that point, very few companies did that. So every month, we had a newsletter about what we've been doing, the progress we had, the successes, the challenges. I think more or less now, every startup has had some kind of investor newsletters. I think the VCs are very overwhelmed by the number of emails they get. But back then, that was a unique way to communicate to the investors. But besides that, I spend a lot of time just catching up and telling them what we are doing, reaching out when there's some challenges. I think, again, people are underestimating the value of telling you have a problem and then solving it. Because I think many are, again, back to that trust through transparency and being vulnerable. They don't want to tell that I have a problem. Like, oh, no, everything is fine. I think it's way more powerful if someone comes to me and say, this is the issue. And I'm like, yeah, that's a huge issue. Oh, I'm so glad I don't have it. But then in 3 to 6 months time, I'm like, you fixed it? Wow. Like that says a lot. Then I know that whatever comes at you later, you are prepared to kind of take on those challenges as well. And as we know, building a startup is literally just like an endless stream of challenges that you have to tackle every day.
Thomas, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I love that we've come full circle and really highlighted on that trust through transparency idea. As we wrap up, is there anything left that you'd like us to know about Unicast? What's the trajectory of Unicast?
Yeah, so for us now, it is really about just continuing to building and developing the best solutions for the real estate and retailers. There's so much more questions that we want to answer, and there's so much more ways we can make the data come to life. Again, as you said, just having data is data, but how can we leverage more dashboards? How can we leverage generative AI to make it easier for them? Real estate investors have a lot of tasks and a lot of kind of things they need to do every single day. but they need to be data-driven to be successful. But they have to spend very little time doing that. So we want to shorten the amount of time and energy and thought they have to spend on us, just knowing that they have this very high quality data that can back up all their investment decisions. So if anyone wants to learn more, please visit unicast.com, or you can email me, thomas@unicast.com as well.
Perfect. So I assume they can, if they want to subscribe or get a trial or a demo or something, that's available at Unicast.
Yeah, love to take them through it.
If people want to connect with you personally, is there any place that you'd like to send people?
Yeah, LinkedIn is my go-to place. So find me Thomas Walley, Thomas with TH, Walley with WALLE. I do a lot of videos about how VP of researchers and how data analysts are using location data and some of the challenges that they are facing. So I'd love to have your comments on the content I'm putting out there. And if you see some other use cases or different scenarios that make you frustrated, we'd love to kind of figure out how we can tackle them together.
Thomas, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Jonathan. Awesome being here.
Listeners, we so appreciate you listening to the end of this episode. If you connected with what we were talking about and you understand the importance of using location data to make better decisions, reach out to either one of us. We would love to talk to you about this and commercial real estate. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time, take care.